Blog Talk Radio.
Readers Entertainment Radio presents Booklights with your host, author Lisa Kessler. Booklights, where we're shining a light on good books.
Hello, everyone. I can't believe that we're already in June. We're halfway through 2024. Wow. Anyway, today you guys are in for such a fantastic treat. Sebastien de Castell is here with us today, and he has some amazing different fantasy series for us to chat about. If you haven't read him yet, you're in for such a treat, and I'll read his bio here so you can get to know him a little bit. Sebastien de Castell had just finished his degree in archaeology when he started to work on his first dig, and 4 hours later realized how much he hated archaeology. He left to pursue a focused career as a musician, ombudsman, interaction designer, fight coordinator, teacher, project manager, actor, and product strategist. It is Monday. I'm having a hard time reading today. Sorry, guys. Anyway, in one way or another, each of these fields plays a role in his writing. He sternly resists the accusation of being a Renaissance man in the hopes that more people will label him that way. Sebastien's acclaimed swashbuckling fantasy series, The Greatcoats, was shortlisted for both the 2014 Goodreads Choice Award for Best Fantasy, the Morningstar Award for Best Debut, the Prix Imaginalis for Best Foreign Work, John Campbell Award for Best New Writer, and his YA fantasy series, Spellslinger, was nominated for the Carnegie Medal, and it's published in more than a dozen languages now. Sebastien lives in Vancouver, Canada, with his lovely wife and 2 belligerent cats. And you can reach him at his website. I did put a link to the website right there on Blog Talk. So if you're listening live with us today, or if you're listening later, be sure to click that. He has lots of great information about the books, the series, and also you can sign up for his newsletter. And he does have a blog with lots of pictures, so definitely go check it out. So without any further delay, you there, Sebastien?
I am. Thanks so much for having me on, Lisa.
Oh, thanks for being back. I know we chatted once before, a year or two ago, and I'm super excited about this new series. You have a new book, Play of Shadows, out. You want to tell everybody about it?
That's right. So Play of Shadows is a swashbuckling fantasy. It's set in the same world as my Greatcoat series, which began with Trader's Blade, which was my debut novel. And this one starts to get into sort of more specifics of that world. We're in a city where acting is believed to be such a sacred profession that there's a certain kind of actors where they believe that when they take the stage, they're able to channel the spirits of the historical figures that they're playing. So it's a little bit like, fantasy celebrity culture taking to somewhat of an extreme. But into this world, our somewhat hapless hero, Damalas, turns up and he's fleeing a judicial duel, and so he hides out in the theater and ends up joining this troupe of actors. And one of the first times he ends up on stage, something happens to him where he accidentally blurts out the completely wrong lines to the play, and in so doing makes it sound as if the city's most beloved historical figure is a murderer, and their most hated villain is actually the hero, and that sets off a chain of events that puts Damalas and his fellow actors against secret armies and conspiracies and everything else. So it's a fun book.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Is this one connected with your? You said it's from the Greatcoats. Will people be able to read it without reading the other series? How are they connected?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you can pick this book up without having ever read any of the Greatcoats books. One of the things that's always been very important for me as a novelist, but also as a reader, is I really want people to be able to pick up any book at any point and be kind of embraced into the story. So in fantasy, there's a tendency now to sort of the interpretation of epic fantasy now is this idea that it's really just one giant long book split into volumes. And so you really have to start at book one, and you have to kind of plod through all of it. But even with the Greatcoat series, which was, 4 books told all from the main character Falcio Valmont's perspective, you could actually start, if you started on the 3rd book, it would kind of tell you how to, what was going on and how to come into the story. And so this is especially true with the Court of Shadows series, which is this new swashbuckling fantasy series. You can pick up Play of Shadows without having read anything of mine, and it'll bring you in with no hassle. There's no research requirement for diving into this series.
Oh, good. And of course, though, as authors, we always hope that it will entice you to go back and read all the other books, right?
Yeah, and I've tried as much as possible, even in that context with Play of Shadows, for example, that it doesn't, although it takes place after the events of the first Greatcoats Quartet, it doesn't spoil most of those events. So if somebody reads Play of Shadows and then goes, I really want to, read these earlier books, you can go in and you won't already know all the terrible things that have happened.
You can be surprised by the terror.
Yeah, exactly.
So what inspired this, offshoot from that series? Were you writing the Greatcoats books and then this character came to life, or is it the history that you wanted to dig into?
Oh, I think it was mostly money. When the Greatcoats series finished, my publishers said, "Well, this is the top series on our list. So could you please, write more?" And so we had quite a lengthy negotiation over, advances and things like that, and we came to a really happy point. But then I had to sort of ask what I wanted to do next with that world, because the first Greatcoats Quartet is entirely told from Falcio Valmont's perspective. He's what's called a Greatcoat, which are these traveling magistrates who, they go on a circuit around the country and they hear cases in different towns and cities and villages along the way. And because it's a fairly corrupt society, there's a lot of powerful people who don't like to be ruled against by these errant judges, and so the Greatcoats sometimes have to duel to enforce their own verdicts. And so that first quartet was so focused on, Falcio's journey, that I didn't want to go, well, here's a popular character, I'll just keep writing the same stories with him, because it starts to not feel very real at a certain point. In real life, when people have gone through all of those things, they usually want to retire or, from violence or at least take a break.
Yes.
So, but the good part of it for me was that because that first quartet was so focused on one character's journey, it didn't really allow me to explore a lot of the fun kind of lore of these traveling magistrates, or the lore of this world where there's 12 different orders of kind of fairly heroic people. So for example, the Bardati, who are sort of the troubadours and who are kind of the country's memory. And so with Play of Shadows, I got the chance to really delve into the lore of the Bardati and all of their different sort of sub-orders, the actors, the dancers, the musicians, and their sort of different abilities. And so with this one, it was just an opportunity to kind of explore that world in a more detailed way and bring other characters and other sort of inspirations into it, because swashbuckling as a sort of a genre has a lot of rich history behind it, and everybody thinks of like the Three Musketeers and books like that. But in the 30s there was Raphael Sabatini, who wrote Scaramouche, and so swashbuckling's always had this really interesting mixture of a kind of political element. It really looked at the politics of its time in a way. And also this notion of antiquated values. Even with the Three Musketeers, people in that book are sort of saying the Musketeers are out of date. They're these values of honor and nobility and fair play. They don't make sense in a modern world. in that case, the modern world being several hundred years old.
Right.
And so that's what I kind of enjoy doing with this, because we live in an era where I think we fight a great deal over our mythologies, and our mythologies don't have to be very, very old anymore. It can be events from 50 years ago where all of a sudden everyone's fighting over, no, it was this person or this group that did this amazing thing, not your group, not your heroes.
Right.
And so Play of Shadows deals with that very directly, because when Damalas screws up that ending line of this play and sets off this political firestorm, we start to see how those kind of myths, those kind of stories influence the politics of the day and the basis for which people either rule or are oppressed. And so that's one of the lovely things about fantasy in general, and I think swashbuckling fantasy in particular, is you kind of get to explore issues that affect your own time, but in a way that's it's not hitting the audience over the head with a political message, for example.
Right. I do like the concept that, history is viewed by who writes it. And I think that's a really interesting concept that you open your book with, is what if the guys who wrote history were wrong?
Absolutely. And one of the very direct inspirations for Play of Shadows is that, 20-odd years ago, I was doing sword fight choreography for theater productions, and I was brought out to London in the UK to do all the fights for a production of Richard III. But what was interesting was this wasn't Shakespeare's Richard III. They wanted to do a production that was based closer to history. And for those who've never seen Richard III, as a play, it makes Richard out to be this kind of monster. They make it very Shakespeare makes it explicit that he's deformed and he's evil and he's cunning because he can't be courageous and all this kind of stuff, which is not very reflective of the history. But in fact, it was the Tudors who basically rewrote the history, right?
Right.
And so having gotten to work on this play that was quite daring, because it was trying to say, no, here's the here's a more accurate historical reflection of what really happened. That kind of inspired me. And so, Play of Shadows is dealing with that. It's the consequences of what if it's something much more important to you. For example, in an American context, what if somebody tried to present a history that said, oh, no, actually, George Washington was a traitor and a coward, and Benedict Arnold was really the hero.
Right,
that would be a pretty controversial thing, because think of how many steps in the history of the United States since that era have depended on the stories of George Washington. How many politicians have stood up and tried to get elected by aligning themselves with George Washington? So, and I should say I have no reason to believe that George Washington was anything other than a great hero.
Right.
But it's a terrifying prospect, and we see it sometimes today when we have something in fairly recent history. Someone is, let's say, they're canceled for having done something awful, and then it turns out maybe that wasn't really what happened, and it's actually very hard to get people to not keep remembering the false story of what happened before. And not to bring too much pop culture into it, but if you think of the trial of the divorce trial of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard,
right?
Think of just how much fighting was going on, like how much effort and money and energy and media was going into just picking apart and analyzing, okay, who's the villain here? Is it Johnny or is it Amber?
Right, they both had awful stories,
Yeah. Whereas I watched that whole thing and I just thought, God, I feel so bad for both these people. This was clearly just a horrible period in their lives, and now it's being made horrible again. So so the stories, some stories I think end up mattering a lot in our lives. They become sort of mythological in nature, and so Play of Shadows kind of delves into that and asks the question, how do you fight back against an inaccurate history when so much of your society is invested in that story being true.
Right. Well, how many books do you foresee will be in this series?
So there's going to be 4. So the contract is 4. I haven't told my publishers it's probably going to be 5. But there's also a prelude book. Yeah, there's also a prelude called Crucible of Chaos, which again features another character, Estebar Burros, who's a kind of swashbuckling Hercule Poirot figure who investigates what appear to be supernatural crimes in the world of the Great Coats. And so with this series, I remember when I was pitching it to my publishers a million years ago, back in 2018, when I said it's going to be kind of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where in each of the first books you can read them in any order because it's a complete story about the sort of the origin of a really fun, heroic figure, and then there'll be a big team up, at the end.
Right.
And so that sounded amazing at the time, but now the Marvel movies are somewhat less popular, so it's probably less of a good pitch.
Yes, well, everything is in a cycle, so by the time you get to the end, it'll probably be super hot again.
That's true.
Well, I wanted to ask about most of our readers are always really curious how you came to be a writer, and your story, because of your multifaceted background, it sounds like you tried everything. So how did you end up becoming a published author from all of those different amazing things that you've been involved in?
Well, I'm either a Renaissance man or a dilettante, depending on how you look at it. And I think probably more dilettante than Renaissance man. But, when I was 16 years old, I was camping by myself on an island off the coast of British Columbia, and I ended up arriving 4 hours early for the next ferry, and I had nothing to do. And I found this book that was called Bard by Keith Taylor. Keith Taylor's an Australian author and a really lovely guy. And I read this book about this traveling musician who fought with swords and went on adventures and told stories. And I was like, oh, my God, this is it. This is the job for me. I want to be a bard. Alas, there were no help wanted ads for that and no university courses in it.
What?
So as a result, I think I had 20 different majors in university, and I think I landed on archaeology only because that was the one I ended up with the most credits in. But, archaeology is mostly, when you're starting out, a lot of archaeology is basically camping and then spending the day, with a toothbrush, digging in the dirt.
Right.
So it's less, there are far too few temples of doom.
Not really Indiana Jones. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I ended up, just doing all kinds of, different careers, and all of them were lovely. And I've always kind of viewed work as an adventure whenever I can. So when I'm, whether if I'm doing a gig as a musician or when I was choreographing, sword fights, or when I was doing acting, or even when I was working as doing project management for, educational institutions, I would try to sort of make that into an adventure for myself. And so all of that kind of eventually led into writing. So back in I think it was 2006, there's a thing called the 3-day novel writing contest that happens every year. And I thought, and I literally forgot that it existed until like the day before. I think I registered within, hours of the deadline. And I didn't even know what story I was going to write. And usually people, they start at like 12:01 and they have an outline and they, and they end up writing, 10 or 15,000 words over those 3 days, or maybe 20,000 words. And I went to bed. I woke up at, I think, 7 or 8 the next morning. I went, I don't know, I guess I'll write this one. And then I just and I hadn't been writing for ages. Like I hadn't done much creative writing before then. I'd written one sort of terrible mystery novel called Skeletons in the Cloister, which the best thing about it was the title.
That is a nice title.
Yeah, that's what my agent said. When I got my agent, one of the first things she asked me was, "Do you have any other books in the hopper?" And I said, "No, all I've got is this terrible mystery novel." And she said, "Oh, what's it called?" And I said, "It's called Skeletons in the Cloister." And she said, "Oh, I can sell that." And I was like, yeah, but it's not a good book. And she said, yeah, but it's a great title.
It is a great
and
title.
that's how I learned everything about the publishing industry. But yeah, in that 3-day novel writing contest, I just started with this idea of these three sort of swashbuckling figures for whom everything had gone wrong, and that all of the ideals that they believed in and fought for and risked their lives for had sort of proven to be failures. The king that they worked for, that they adored, who was trying to bring reforms to the country, had been deposed and then executed by the dukes. The knights, who were the sort of very oppressor kind of class, serving all these lords, are viewed as heroes. And the greatcoats, these traveling justices who tried to bring the protection of the law to all these cities and villages around the country, are reviled and, in fact, called traitors. They call them tratari, tattercloaks. And so over that 3-day novel writing contest, and I had a music gig in between.
Oh, my gosh.
I had to sing The Lady in Red at a wedding, which is never that much fun on no sleep. But I wrote 44,000 words in 3 days, which was crazy. And
you were inspired.
Yeah, and that became, that 44,000 word draft, which at the time was called Three of Traitors, became Traitor's Blade, and years later became my debut novel, and launched me into a 4-book contract, which then got me an 8-book contract and another 4-book contract, and it just sort of kept going from there. Now I'm almost exactly 10 years into my writing career, and I've had 18 novels published, and I've got, I think, 6 or 7 more under contract, so it's been a surprisingly stable job.
Well, I love that origin story, and it does sound like you took all of those different careers and, sprinkled them into all of the books, so maybe they were all just, on-the-job training.
They've all, they were all great moments and great opportunities to work with and meet new people and learn new things. And at the end of the day, writing, especially as a novelist, it's very much about taking all the disparate experiences and the strange things. Sometimes they're big momentous events, but sometimes they're just tiny events, interactions with one person where you showed up and there was a new person at work and you just instantly disliked them, and you felt like you had all these good reasons, and then you slowly realized you were completely wrong about them. They were actually lovely people. Those kind of things end up informing your writing. That's what, when you write something that's your best writing, it's almost always coming from that. And so the great news for people who are listening, who want to be writers, who feel like, oh, I keep hearing about writers who started when they were 12 years old or something. I certainly wasn't that person. Nobody ever thought I was going to become a novelist. People thought, most people I was dealing with before my first book deal thought I was like a PowerPoint pusher, making slides and presentations. and because it's not about whether you were obsessed with writing as a teenager or whether you inhale a lot of incense and drink special teas. It's just whether you find something, a story to tell, and you tell it as passionately as you can. So even if people haven't started, some of the, Dave Duncan, another a great Canadian writer, I believe he wrote his first novel at age 50, and then I think wrote 50 more novels before he died.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. It's a wonderful field because it's one where you can start at any time.
Right, for sure. Well, I wanted to ask you what's coming next, because you have a few different series that are still ongoing, right? What can readers look for next?
Sure. Well, so Malevolent 7, which is a new series, I think my agent pitched it as Deadpool in Westeros. So it's basically, the Malevolent 7 is basically it's like the Magnificent 7, the old Western, but with wizards blowing things up and swearing constantly. So if you don't like swearing, it's a bad book for you. But if you do like swearing, I think there is more swear words per chapter than in any other fantasy novel on the shelves. So that was the accomplishment I was aiming for there.
Nice.
And that book, surprisingly, outsold its initial sales targets by 4 times.
Wow.
And so my publishers have asked for 2 more books in that series, so I'm starting the next one of those. and then the Argosy series, which is a spin-off of the Spellslinger young adult fantasy series. There's 6 Spellslingers out, and then there are 3 Argosy books, and a 4th one will come out, I think, next year. And then I can't say anything too much about it now, but there will be an announcement soon about a big sci-fi novel that I'm co-writing with a great writer friend of mine, and that came out of just an experiment together, just doing some collaborative writing, and then we ended up with a book deal. So that'll be announced, I think, in the coming weeks. So lots to come.
Congratulations. Very exciting. Have you always wanted to write a sci-fi, or was this a shock to you, too?
This was very much a shock to me, too. I've always had sort of space opera ideas, but this is a much more sort of realistic science fiction novel. Yeah, it just came out of just working with another writer, and we would do these writing experiments where we would, get online together and have a shared Google Doc, and then we'd each sprint 5 minutes at a time of writing. The other person would then suddenly have to pick it up and write the next 5 minutes, and we did that a ton of times and ended up writing all of these great stories. It's a very unusual way. Usually when authors write collaboratively, they're swapping chapters back and forth.
Right.
But the way we do it is we actually write live on the fly together and see where it goes. And so it's a wonderful process. Whether even if it had never produced anything, it would still have been just a wonderful process for experimenting. And so, yeah, we would experiment with different genres and subgenres and different types of stories. And one of them we just went, hey, I think this one could be a book. And so, yeah, I can't say anything more about it, but that'll get announced in a few weeks, I think.
Wow, that is so exciting and really interesting way to do it, too. I've never heard of anybody writing 5 minutes at a time, back and forth, back and forth. Did you guys have fun trying to stump each other?
Well, it's a never-ending process of stumping the other because you'll be like, oh great, I've set this next beat up perfectly, and then they go off in completely wrong direction, and you're like,
right.
Oh my God, why did they do that? And then you go, oh no, that's actually a really cool direction. Okay, I'll extend that further. I know where they're going. I'll take that further, and then you can see on the other writer's expression, they're like, oh God, why is he going the wrong direction? I thought I set that up perfectly. But what it does is it produces stories that are stories that neither of you would have or could have written by yourself.
Alone.
And that's the part that I like, right? Because once you've written, once you've published like 18 novels, I just end up, I have a sense of, I know what my books sort of will tend to look like. And so being able to break out of that with someone else is, and go, okay, well, this is the book that I couldn't have written. That's really exciting.
Yeah, I think that's very cool. Are you guys going to write any more, do you think?
Well, we have, I think we've done 12 other stories, so we'll see. And certainly if this one's a success, then there will probably be some, publishers get very enthusiastic about convincing you to write more once you've got a successful book with them.
Yeah, that's true.
Surprisingly less enthusiastic when it's not as successful. So
right, I know. Why is that? Business. Yeah. Well, before we run out of time, how can readers get in touch with you when they get excited about the books? Are you on social media? Are you going out on tour? How can they talk to you?
Yeah, so I do a lot of traveling. So I think I'll be at Dragon Con in Atlanta this year. I just found out about that, so that's in August. I'm sort of on social media, but I don't tend to do much there other than say thank you when somebody leaves a very, a nice review. The best way to reach me is from my website, which is decastell.com. That's DECASTELL.com. I'm easy to find online. So there's a contact page there, and so you can send me an email from there, and I reply to every single email I get as long as it's not spam. So if you are a Nigerian prince and you really want to write me, please preface with, look, I know this is usually a scam, but I swear I really am a Nigerian prince.
Right. And I really do love your books.
There you go. Exactly.
You don't even have to give me your bank account number.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Well, thank you so much for being here today. It was great chatting with you. Good luck with the new book. Everyone go out and grab a copy of Play of Shadows. It's the first book in the Court of Shadows series, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon, Sebastien.
I'd be delighted. Thanks so much, Lisa.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for joining us on Booklights. Be sure to connect with us at www.readersentertainment.com for articles, blogs, videos, and podcasts that matter to readers.